I am very thrilled to have my guest with me today. His name is Jimmy Vallee. Jimmy is a U.S. business author and venture capitalist, labeled in the media as among America's top energy deal makers. He has over 2 decades experience advising public and private companies, MLPs, which, by the way, I Googled that because I wasn't 100% sure. And the first thing that came up was Major League Pickleball. I don't think that's what this was.
Wasn't what
MLPs,
I did. Shows
I,
you how much the world has evolved, though.
I know, right? The next thing was My Little Ponies. Assuming that it wasn't
Gosh,
those two things, I then
just
found that
neither
it
of
was
those. I know.
Master Limited Partnerships, I believe, is what
Attaboy.
that's
There
referring.
you go.
Okay.
Right, right.
Also, experience with investment banking firms, sovereign wealth, and private equity funds in more than $100 billion worth of worldwide mergers and acquisitions transactions. I don't know too many people that can say that they've done over 100 billion rather, in transactions. So that's
Yep,
pretty freaking cool.
yep.
And you are the founding partner and current managing director at Valhil Advisors. So first
Yes,
and
sir.
foremost, Jimmy, thank you and welcome to the call.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate the introduction.
We had the pleasure of meeting each other not too long ago down in Florida after the Quantum Summit event. Our mutual friend and your coworker Molly Elmore made the introduction, and I've had the pleasure of having Molly on the podcast several times. Her name may come up later in this conversation as we talk about XRP valuations and whatnot. But your history, I don't want to go too deep into that, only because you cover that on almost every other podcast and video. And for folks that are interested, they can get into that. But what I find that your claim to fame, at least in the crypto world, it was really about the XRP buyback. So we're going to talk about that in a second.
Okay.
But before we get into all of that, I do want to know, just curiosity wise, what is it like doing these multi-billion-dollar transactions? Is it just as stressful as multi-million dollar transactions with a few more zeros on it, or is it considerably
Shockingly,
anew?
shockingly, the smaller transactions are much more stressful
Hmm.
because when you're talking about doing the largest single transaction, which dramatically helped me get up towards the 100 billion, was $11 billion. And
Hmm.
that was we took I was representing Oklahoma Gas and Electric, which is a major utility, natural gas utility in Oklahoma, and CenterPoint Energy, which is kind of Texas, Arkansas. They've got some stuff up in Illinois as well. But we're taking their midstream businesses, so they're like their pipelines, and merging those together into a new company and then taking that company public.
Hmm.
Um, when you're working on something like that, or like Continental United, we represented Continental Airlines and its merger with United, which took 6 years to do, believe it or not. We started that. I was a fourth year associate, and we signed the deal in 2010. I was a partner. So, you know, sometimes these things take a little time, but
All
the
right.
bigger deals have so many people working on them. And also, the legal terms of the contracts are pretty much straight down the fairway. You've got very sophisticated people on both sides. You've got investment banks involved, accounting firms involved, just a lot of people who are really know how to do this stuff. And that tends to, although there's a lot of work to do, it tends to move the process along in a very organized manner, and
Hmm.
with a little less stress. I mean, there's a little stress and all that type of stuff, but whereas when you've got an entrepreneur on the other side who's selling their baby uh,
Hmm.
for $5 million or something like that, every issue is material to that deal.
Hmm.
Every issue is important, and people can get really stressed out, and sometimes it's kind of the only time that they've gone through that process.
Hmm.
So yeah, the smaller ones are always harder. You got just as many issues, but less of a team, and they're more material for the size of that transaction.
That's interesting. Is the government often involved in those larger transactions?
Only to so now I think the threshold is it's like 119.5 million. You have to file what's called a Hart-Scott-Rodino filing, HSR. So it's a pre-merger notification, ties back to a law that was passed in the 70s to be to basically prevent monopolistic conduct. So you basically have to file this document, pay a fee, and then the government, when you file it with the FTC, the government has 30 days to decide whether they're going to intervene and try to block the deal. And if they do that, they basically start down a process which is called a second request. If you go into the second request, the government's very involved. I mean,
Mm.
they really dig in and kind of, you know, really look at every little piece of the business and what you're trying to do. It's super data intensive to respond to and everything. Fortunately, most of my deals in the past were energy related, you know, oil and gas related deals, tons of competition in the various markets. And so, you know, we usually got what was called early termination on most of the bigger deals that we tried to do. There were a few that we had to wait the 30 days. Continental United had all kinds of other things going on. So you had, you know, they had these massive alliance, still do have the like Sky Team, and it's like when you go on a plane and you hear all about their marketing alliances and all that stuff, which added a whole different layer. And it not only was, you know, just the asset base of these, because you've got terminals and you got unions with the pilots and with the flight attendants and all this stuff. So there was a lot going on in that deal that had kind of government right around it. Obviously, the
Hmm.
government uh, there that was a very unique deal for a lot of reasons, but one of the big reasons it took so long was Continental had tried to merge with Northwest back in the 90s, and the government had blocked that merger from happening as being anti-competitive.
Mm.
Um, so they effectively did a synthetic merger. They did a joint venture. They Continental entered into the marketing alliance with Northwest and Delta, but they Northwest got something in Continental called that we referred to as the golden share. It was one share of Series B preferred stock that had really no economic rights to it. In fact, it was redeemable for $100 upon the occurrence of certain events, but it gave Northwest a veto right on pretty much any strategic transaction that Continental could do with another airline. So we spent basically 5 years trying to work around this golden share. But if Northwest entered into one of those types of deals, so a strategic transaction with another airline, that's when it became redeemable for $100. And that's what ended up happening. In 2008,
Wow.
Northwest agreed to merge with Delta. And so we got to redeem the share for $100.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It was wild. So, and then, we moved forward. So, and of course, our client, hope this doesn't bore you too much. Our client wanted to be in a position that, there was a rumor coming up almost like, you know, every other month that, oh my God, Northwest and Delta are going to announce a deal. We got to be ready to go. And they put us on this timeline that's like, we want to be able to announce our merger like within 14 days of the other merger happening, which the only way to do that is basically to go ahead and work up the whole deal with the other side. So we actually got real close to signing the deal in 2008 when the financial crisis hit.
Oh, jeez.
And they decided to hit the pause button. But that's when the reason we were so close, because that's when Northwest and Delta announced that they were going to do their merger. So we were like full steam ahead. Of course, it happened when I was on a vacation, ruined my whole vacation. Um, there was a lot of stress on that. This is, back in BlackBerry time when, with the iPhones and everything now, you can do all these amazing things about commenting and stuff that you could never do back
Right.
then. I was getting up at 5 a.m. I was in Mexico and like
Oh gosh.
reading this document and then like toggling back out and typing a comment into my email and then going back into it was a disaster.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It was
You know,
oh my.
this this doesn't bore me. I mean, some of it's very complex, but the financial world is so complex. One of my favorite movies is The Big Short, and they do an
That's great.
incredible job of simplifying some of these very complex things. So it to me is this incredible battlefield and competition, and so it's nice to bring some illumination to that. So thanks for sharing that.
You
Um,
bet.
you were, as I mentioned earlier, you've been dubbed America's top energy deal maker, or one of the top energy deal makers. Do you still have your pulse on the energy market? I'm curious what your take is on America's current energy position.
A little bit, part of what led me to kind of leave the practice at the times, because the climate change narrative had become so pervasive, and capital into the traditional energy sector, so oil and gas, was really starting to, it was so slow, it was almost frozen.
Mm,
um, so there just wasn't a lot of stuff happening, and I think it's pretty much for the scope of the term of the Biden administration. I don't think much has changed. It's been very kind of, there's been some deals happening out there, but the pace that we were doing, kind of post shale revolution up through 2015, 2016, never really returned. I mean,
mm,
there was a reason that, I was dubbed that. It's just because we had so many deals going on. There was literally a new deal coming up every week, and they're all material.
jeez.
Uh, and I was blessed to have some very prolific clients who were doing a lot of stuff. So, I don't know that we'll ever see that type of scenario in the energy industry again. It was a lot of it was brought on by what we called the shale revolution, which back in the late 90s, the petroleum engineers finally kind of connected up horizontal drilling, so turning your drill bit horizontally, with this concept of hydraulic fracturing, using water to basically cause these fractures or fissures into shale rock. Before that, every time they tried, the rock kind of collapsed on itself. I think it was like mud, just like all fell together, and it
Hmm.
wouldn't produce. But they finally figured it out. Mitchell Energy, which was run by a Houstonian named George Mitchell, developed the woodlands north of Houston. An amazing philanthropic, energy kind of tycoon. It was his firm that kind of figured it out in the Barnett Shale area, which is up in kind of the Dallas Fort Worth area. And then, it took even another 5 or 6 years before it really kind of Wall Street got there. But once it took off, we had a couple of things that happened. That happened. Wall Street got there, and the capital markets were kind of available for the oil and gas industry in a way they had not been in some time. You kind of had to be a super major before that. So the independents started to rise, and this starts to really take off when the financial crisis hits. So when that big short stuff is happening, and all of a sudden all these law firms and investment banks that are in Houston are starting to be at the top of what we call the cap table, the league tables, as doing the most deals, highest value and stuff. And Wall Street, like, what's going on in Texas, so it really did. It was remarkable for my career. A ton of people in Houston did really well, just being service providers to that market phenomenon that happened kind of
Hmm.
when the shale revolution really took off.
Mm. Um, you had a very interesting pivot in your career when the pandemic hit and you found yourself at home with some time on your hands,
Right.
probably for the first time forever if you're doing
All
multi-billion
time.
dollar transactions.
Yeah.
And I loved how you shared that you started to hear about more about crypto and you started to dig into it. I'm very interested because you've stated that initially you thought it was essentially bullshit, that
Yeah.
just is kind of fake money or whatever. And then the light bulb went off. Would you share that experience? Like what was it that you all of a sudden realized, oh, this is a much bigger deal than just some
Yeah.
shiny digital
So,
coins.
just briefly, so your audience can have the perspective. 2017, when Bitcoin went into its bull run. I think it got up to $20,000 back then. And then XRP ultimately peaked in like January of 2018. I had a very good friend and client of mine that I was on the phone with who had invested in some Bitcoin, and he was giddy as a schoolgirl when I was talking to him about it. And I was literally like, "What are you doing?" It seemed for this particular person, uber conservative, great financial professional. We had done some really big deals together. And I never even would have thought he'd have been like taking a risk on something like this. And he was just describing this. I was like, I don't know what you're doing. Like this is like magic internet money or something. And
Right.
it's like, yeah. So I was really like, it's like, that's like the biggest scam that we've ever heard, back at that time. um, when the pandemic hit, I did, so you got a guy who'd been working at my pace, um, suddenly has like, I mean, there were months and months of lockdown and free time, and all
Right.
you're doing is walking and reading stuff that you've never really read and watching YouTube videos. Um, it's then I started to kind of understand, or I started to see some reports, and these were like BIS, IMF type reports, and they were talking about digital and
Mm.
going, digital. I read the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper on Bitcoin, which was, that's a super great place to start, because you understand the double spend problem that they're trying to solve, with the way blockchain technology works and all that. And so I started. I was like, oh, maybe he wasn't crazy, So I bought some Bitcoin back in the March. I think it had fallen down to, it was like $6,000 or something like that.
Mhm.
um, and just I was kind of just playing with it a little bit, sending it around. And it would take, back then it was taking like, it was at least 5 or 6 hours to settle. And sometimes it'd be like you'd send it out and it'd be like, or you'd buy some and it wouldn't be like in your wallet till the next day. And it was the weirdest it was like sending your child out into the abyss or something. It's like, yeah, maybe they'll come home.
Yeah.
Just no. Um, but being that I had the background I had, I was just like, this is never going to work. Like we can send wires right now, and we at least know we got them like that day. And I was just like, we need something that's like going to be uber fast. It's got to be low cost, all this stuff. So it kind of kept me looking, because I was just very nervous about it. I, of course, had started to learn about the potential for 51% takeovers and stuff like that. And even as remote as that was, I knew that there was a lot of the miners were being manufactured in China, things of that nature. We were starting to have conversations with people that wanted to manufacture miners in the States. The other big group, because I was in the oil and gas business, was the kind of the mobile mining facilities where they were going to start capturing flare gas and basically cogening electricity on site to run the miners, which, as I sit here today, is probably, in my opinion, the only actual use case for Bitcoin as we sit here today. But
Mm.
because you are taking something that's otherwise just wasted in the atmosphere and at least turning it into some value that can be sent anywhere in the world. So that's a good thing. But yeah, it was during that time. This would have been the spring, early summer of 2020 that I finally started to learn about XRP. Went through the same process, started acquiring XRP, doing all the research. I, of course, came across the FinCEN settlement from 2015 where they labeled it a virtual currency. There was other stuff that was out there, like Chris Giancarlo had done he was at Wilkie Farr at this point in time, and which was like a peer law firm to the types of firms that In fact, there was a Wilkie Farr Houston office. This is a great, they do a lot of oil and gas stuff. Anyway, he had done an analysis of XRP and applied the Howie test to it. Had come to the conclusion, wouldn't pass the Howie test, therefore not a security. And it just seemed like, in using it, it was so fast, right? It was. I still kind of get a little giddy. Now it's
Yeah.
mostly like I'll be sending it from my Uphold wallet and just converting it to fiat to go into my Bank of America account or something like that.
Hmm.
And it's great. Now they have the instant settlement, which is it's just crazy how fast this stuff was. And it's super cheap. To send, if I send you XRP, it's going to cost me like nothing to do
Yep.
that. It's a sub fraction of a penny
Yeah.
to do that. And it was like, okay, this, together with what I was reading, the Fed was certainly publishing papers about moving into digital, the IMF, the BIS. There was all sorts of central banks starting to talk about, pursuing central bank digital currency. Um, I just started to understand that if we were going to replumb the financial system, which it appeared like that's what we were going to do, that this would be more of the technology that we were going to use to do it. So
Yeah.
I
I
was kind
wanted, I want to share. I'm talking, in fact, I was talking to a friend earlier today, and was sharing how the global system is really converting to this blockchain backed economy. And, he was a little hesitant. Are you sure about that? Is that really actually happening? And I think this is a pretty big fundamental shift for the average person who's not in it every day like yourself. And I have my, I'm connected to it, not as deep as you are, but I certainly see it already. That I think the average person still thinks that crypto is this new innovation, that is this kind of this, it's the new mousetrap, and maybe we could use it for this, maybe we could use it for that. And I think what people need to understand is that no, the current system that we have is fundamentally, mathematically, globally, politically insolvent. And that has been foreseen for many decades. And the geopolitical leaders have seen this coming, and they've been slowly building out the infrastructure, as you said, the plumbing for this new ecosystem, this new digital blockchain based ecosystem. So it's really only a matter of time before the current system collapses into, uh, the bubble pops, hopefully nice soft landing into somehow, some way we're going to be all blockchain,
of,
probably within our lifetime, certainly within my child's lifetime. um, Wanted to ask you, you mentioned a second ago about your opinion on Bitcoin. Is it possible, I keep throwing this out there, I'd just be curious to get your feedback on this, is it possible that the lack of speed and the cost of it is actually a feature and not a bug, in that it would be a good place to store value and not have multiple transactions, but like gold, I'm going to store my wealth in a Bitcoin?
Yes. And I think that the narrative of the Bitcoin maxis has kind of moved to a store of value type. Um, I I'd, I'd I don't know that I'd call go so far as to call it like a feature, like something that's positive about it. Um, because the way I look at this is I I personally believe that technology and life always flows to the most efficient use case. Um, and that's going to be what is, faster, cheaper, more secure, those types of things. And at some point, I think as you're talking about taking the capital markets and, all the different instruments and things that can be put on blockchain, voting, all this stuff, the technology is naturally going to push us to the thing that is the most efficient use of that. And when that continues to happen, people will be less and less enamored with Bitcoin as a technological innovation to do those things.
Well, but
Um,
that's kind of my point. I mean, just like gold today is not efficient, it's got friction to it, it's cumbersome, and yet it is tested, stood the test of time because of the principles of gold. And is it possible that Bitcoin could potentially stand the test of time in the principle that the very friction that feels like, hey, we're not going to actually really use this, is actually the reason why we might, because of its finite amount of Bitcoin that are out there, it might actually be something that is a good storage of value. That's my thought process based on the principle, not necessarily the utility of it.
well, that may be the case. We won't be buying it from you.
Well, and I was just gonna say, a lot of people get very emotional about this stuff, and they're
Yeah.
team Bitcoin or team XRP, or and
Right.
and there's good reason to be motivated by these technologies for sure. But at the end of the day, for me personally, I try to keep things at arm's length. But I do like to, continue to pick people's minds about it, and yours
Yeah.
was one I was very interested to get some input on. So
Yeah. Yeah.
on that
Uh,
regard. Yeah. I wanted to ask you if you could just briefly give us an overview of uh, your proposal to the Fed. I know you've been through this a million times, but if you could just, for my audience, briefly give us the highlights of
sure.
how you interjected your message and your position into the XRP community and ultimately the crypto community with this proposal to the Fed
Yeah.
and
I
why it was
appreciate you
necessary in the
asking.
first place.
I actually haven't talked about this in quite some time.
Okay.
Uh, So again, we are very much convinced as a firm, personally, that we are moving to a completely digital financial system, and in the early innings, because I'm an attorney of the lawsuit, it's important that we had done a lot of this due diligence. We had acquired a bunch of XRP in 2020 before there was any potential for the SEC. I mean, we knew about the Ethereum, the decentralization speech by Bill Hinman that had occurred in 2018. There were so many um, factors out there that had kind of been like the security ship had sailed, that it didn't even really seem like a possibility that had happened. There
What
were
what was
other
the what was the SEC's actual claim that it was a security then? I still get a little bit confused what the
Well, they
narrative
threw
was around that.
they threw the kitchen sink at it, but they basically factually described it as three different buckets. That there was these institutional sales, there was the programmatic sales that had been sales that were just kind of put into exchanges on a very kind of uh, 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 what's the word? I want to say it's programmed. It was basically programmed, had algorithms to basically push it into the market at a certain price. And then there was the XRP that they had given to like contractors and employees and stuff like that. So there was those three buckets that the SEC defined as what Ripple had allegedly done wrong. The claim being that, all those were securities and that none of them had been registered under Section 5 of the 1933 Act, Securities Act. The 33 Act requires any offer or sale of securities to be registered. It exempts from that. What Section 4 deals with are private placements. These are like your Reg D, accredited investor type placements. The way most of the capital markets actually are transferred. Most of the capital markets are not done in public. They're done, in businesses selling some equity to investors and things like that on the private level.
Hmm.
And that's the way private equity works, right? So they basically made those claims that those three kind of buckets of activities were all unregistered sales of securities. Ripple disputed that any of it was a securities transaction at all. And one of the major things that Ripple put forth was rejected by Judge Torres in the order, but it was this thing called the essential ingredients test, where they really went back to the time around when the Howie Test was decided back in 1946, I think. It was a Supreme Court decision.
The Howie test being the test to confirm whether something's a security or not.
Yeah. So the securities law has a definition of securities, and it's got a whole laundry list of stuff. It's like stock, bond, option, no, it's got all these things, and then it's got like this catch-all thing that they left undefined at the end called an investment contract. And that was kind of commonly understood at the time that the Howie test was decided. Uh, but it needed to be interpreted. So the Howie test basically set forth these certain elements that had to be present for the thing to be an investment contract, therefore a security.
Mm.
So kind of the whole discussion of the Ripple case became about the Howie test and its application to XRP. And the critical thing is if there is some type of a contract, and that was one of the essential ingredients that Ripple argued in their defense, was that there had to be a contract. That contract had to be post-sale obligations on the issuer to do certain things, which in most of the cases was not the case, but for the institutional sales. So the judge, this was like 2.5 years. I mean, it was just the order came out in July of it's about to be a year, July 13th of 2023. And they said, we're going to look at the three buckets that the SEC said was security sales. We agree with the SEC that the institutional sales were sales of securities because there was a contract with investors that were really thinking Ripple was going to go out and make a market in this XRP, do all this great stuff, and therefore the value of the XRP would rise. And that was an investment contract. But then they rejected that the programmatic sales or the sale or the distributions to the employees or contractors were securities transactions.
When you say programmatic sales, is that essentially retail sales?
It was sales through an exchange. They really don't know who was going to be buying it, that was the differentiating factor that the judge, kind of discussed pretty thoroughly. Is said, look, they've taken this asset, they put it on exchange. They have no idea who's going to buy it. There will be no relationship by the fact this person buys the XRP. So there is no real contract. There's no expectations that Ripple is going to go out and do something to increase the value of the XRP or whatever. So that's not just because it's a blind transaction. They don't even know when the buyer's going onto the market. They don't even know this Ripple they're buying from. Right. That was a big deal. How they know Jimmy Vallee XRP, So the fact that you kind of didn't have that contractual nexus was pretty critical for that bucket.
And so was the institutional bucket then deemed security in that regard then? Is that what you said?
Yes. The institutional bucket was, so it's a very interesting and well-written opinion that we've thought a lot about. We've commented publicly about it. I think the judge was very deliberate in writing it the way she did, because she basically made a factual determination that XRP in and of itself is not a security, that it has to be kind of something else with it. And so the importance of doing it that way is that became a matter of record as determined by the trial court, which is where the trial courts are the triers of fact, right? So you either have a jury, or in this case, it was left up to a judge, decide what the facts are. And then even if you appeal that, you really can't change that factual record, right? That's the trier of fact determined what the fact was, and she determined that XRP in and of itself was not a security. So that basically made that issue non-appealable.
Right? Fascinating.
Yeah.
So what's the current status then? Is there still lingering lawsuit, or
she determined that the institutional sales, I have another comment about that and then I'll answer your question. Determined that the institutional sales were sales of securities. Okay.
Okay.
Because there was a contract, because the buyers had a direct relationship, contextual nexus, they're acquiring from Ripple. They had expectations. They were basically investing in it, right? And they had expectations that Ripple's going to go out and, increase the value of XRP. Therefore, they would do well on their investment. The issue with that is that, of course, these institutions are they're accredited investors, right? And so these, in my opinion, would have effectively been private placements. In fact, they're classic private placements, and therefore they're exempt from the registration requirements of Section 5. That's Jimmy Vallee's commentary on the way that it now sits. Ripple did not treat it. If we could go back in time, knowing that it was going to turn out that way, Ripple could have just filed a Form D and perfected the private placement way back when they were doing those transactions,
And
and
have no issue with, oh,
there'd be
geez.
no issue. So it was literally, we're talking about a foot fault violation of the securities law here.
Okay.
Now, so that's the safe. So now that they were determined that it was a security, they did not do that, filing the Form D and stuff like that, because they took the position it was not a security, right? But now that's been determined it was a security, now they're in the remedies phase of the lawsuit, which they have to kind of get through to then get to whether or not anything's going to be appealed. And initially the SEC came out. So now it's like, what is the fine that Ripple's going to have to pay for doing an unregistered, sale of securities? The SEC initially came in and asked for $2 billion. Ripple responded, said, no, it needs to be more like 10 million.
Yeah.
And then I think the latest thing, which has been getting a lot of, airtime on Twitter, is that the SEC basically said, Ripple's basing this 10 million off this settlement we did in this other case. And even if you applied that, it'd be more like 100 million or something like that. So it's almost like we're watching a public negotiation of the settlement terms,
Yeah.
which is fine, which is kind of what led to the buyback thing. Because I really wanted these discussions to be held in the public, and now they are. But that's where we are in the case. It could literally be, it could be settled or decided any day now.
Okay. But it would likely have immaterial effect on the actual valuation, the public market value of it, or
Well, we're getting into these, deep discussion of differences between market value and fair market value and things
right.
like that. What drove us to do what we did, is going back to 2021 now, was there was all the weirdness that had happened around the SEC and the filing this lawsuit. Jay Clayton was the deciding vote of the 5 commissioners. It was a 3-2 vote of the commissioners whether to bring the enforcement action. He left the next day, like literally the next day.
Really? Jeez, I didn't know that.
Then he joins this hedge fund called One River, who in October had made $1 billion investment in Bitcoin and Ethereum. So looked
So
really bad.
let me just briefly explain the broader controversy here, because what it seems like for those who are paying attention, and I am again sort of at arm's length with this, and please correct me if I'm misinterpreting any of this, but the broader controversy is that the SEC is applying certain standards regulations to Ripple that they are not doing to other technologies, other companies.
You
And so
got
it
it.
certainly seems like for just to bottom line it, the weaponization of the department against certain competitive technologies, and thereby propping up their their horse in the race, giving it space to breathe, giving it time to develop and innovate, giving it potentially even capital. I don't even know about that, but so that's the broader controversy. And then you kind of really injected yourself when you said, "Hold on, this this asset has been suppressed. We propose a buyback," and you became very You became a lot of you made a lot of good friends in the XRP community with that buyback proposal. Walk us through what the valuation was and the different models that you use in that, because that to me is very fascinating.
Mhm.
This is maybe where we mention and give a shout out to Molly because I think she was a part of that.
She was a part of that. And there was kind of two iterations of this process. There was kind of the 2021 where we pulled together a committee of it was about 20 people at that time. Um, and there would be, it's confidential, not because it wasn't known that we had the committee. It was confidential that we weren't going to disclose the people who were on the committee because they would be, they would be doxxed and hammered and all this type of stuff. And we didn't want that to happen to anybody. But there people would be surprised if they knew who was on the committee because there
Mm,
were some really big names on the
mm,
committee. Um,
interesting.
but we we were concerned that regulatory capture is the concept that you were alluding to, where basically the federal government, because of influences from maybe the private sector, are misapplying the law or applying it in an unequal manner that allows one business to get a competitive advantage over another business. And if that's happening, that's really it's tantamount to a taking of the asset. It was not unprecedented for there be this type of government taking. It had happened back in 1933 with gold. The federal government had bought back gold, and we we actually had surfaced some information, and I think at the time it would have been more classified as a rumor, that in fact there was a coordinated effort to set up a buyback scenario, that they were literally going to hammer it and keep it suppressed and then come in and offer about $5 or $10 to buy it all back, because the Fed specifically was going to need it to move into the financial system. That number one, digital financial system. Number two, they had to have like 2 years where there were no claims on the asset in order to be for it to be able to be used freely, which has now manifested in changes to the Uniform Commercial Code. There's a new Article 12 being rolled out in every state
Hmm.
that deals with these types of things. So we were like, well, look, it's fine if you're going to buy it back. You're just going to pay what it's really worth.
Mm-hmm.
This $5-10 thing, it's exactly what happened with gold when the government bought it back. They bought it back at 23, $24, and like immediately on the other side of the buy raised raised it to $35. So we started suggesting that the fair market value should be in the multiple thousands, if you're going to buy it back, and then proposed a process by which that could occur. And we submitted that to the Fed and also the Treasury.
And
There
these
was
are these weren't just wave the magic wand, come up, let me just come up with a number. These were pretty sophisticated price models that you utilize. In fact, wasn't one of them from BlackRock themselves, the financial
what
institution?
you're thinking of. So one of the main ones back then that was floating around was Robbie Mitchnick, when he was a graduate student at Stanford, had worked with Susan Affey, who was a Ripple board member, and they published a valuation paper on a fundamental way to value digital assets. And they looked at Bitcoin and XRP,
Okay.
and that had been done back in 2018. So that was one that we certainly were looking at. We had done what became the collateralization model, where it's like, okay, what if you take every asset, tokenize it, and put it on XRP as like the master ledger of everything? What would the value have to be? Um, and those were kind of the two main things that we were using around that time. And we had some kind of we had some information. Let's just say we had some market information that were coming from sources that may or may not have been using it in a certain way that was not really visible to the public, that suggested that it was a dramatically higher price. So our initial proposal, I think, was 25,000 when we submitted in September. We ended up getting some more information that it might be a little higher. We did another one at the end of October of 21. Um, and we ultimately, we weren't going to do it. We weren't really going public with it initially. Um, but we basically gave them a certain amount of time to engage with us and start having the conversation. And when they didn't do that, we ended up disclosing that we had done what we did, and that led to a bunch of hoopla in the marketplace. So we had some people who ended up contacting different district banks of the Fed to see if they had it. And we actually did have the St. Louis Fed confirmed that they had received it, so they'd even be willing to talk to us about it, talk to Valhil about it. And we tried to call them, and they never gave us an audience. So that was pretty much the way it was until towards the end of 2022. And that's when all the ETHgate stuff really started to go mainstream. And so we reconstituted the confidential committee, invited a lot more people on, had some influencers on as well. All of them promptly went and said they were on it, like on their shows and everything, which caused mass hysteria. But we had over 50 people this time around, and we actually more formally had two subcommittees. We had a communications committee and then a valuation subcommittee. And that is the group of people. There are 7 people on that one, I think. Those are the people that really like dug deep and did what became published in June, I think, of 2023, which had like the 6 or 7 different models that were used, and then also looked at different versions of that, like the collateralization model. I think if you looked at every asset, it spit out a price like 122,000, as I recall. And then we looked at like 10% of that, right? So we did a couple of different versions of the Anthony Mitchnick model. We had a discounted cash flow model that we had an investment banker who was on the valuation committee do. We had an accounting professional in India come up with this 99-year model, which was fascinating, and like discount all that back. And his was like 13,000, like a present value of like 13,000. We did a football field, which has been seen a lot, where we like plotted where the values were from the different models and stuff. But that was the real heavy. I mean, that we worked on that for months, and you know put it in paper. Molly was basically, Molly. So she
Yep.
we got her involved. She had been doing infographics on all this. So the way I came to know her is because she'd been doing infographics on a bunch of things in the crypto space. She ended up doing one on the buyback in 2022.
I
And
remember
I was
seeing that.
just super impressed at kind of the even-handedness that she dealt with it. So I ended up reaching out to her on LinkedIn. When I formed the committee, I asked her to be a part of it, and she's just a natural leader, right? I mean, she just threw herself in and ended up kind of rising to the top on kind of all the things. So she kind of ended up coordinating a lot of what we did on all 3 committees. And then as we really started to work on the paper, she like really rolled up her sleeves and started writing a lot of the paper and all that stuff. So she was a complete godsend when she kind of came on the scene, and is still to this day. Now we're
Right.
disappointed. And
She's got a brilliant mind. I love the way she can simplify concepts and articulate them. It's super
yeah,
helpful
yeah,
with all this complexity. You mentioned a minute ago about the valuation of XRP on like a secondary market being much, much higher
yep.
than this is
Let's just say it was another market.
Okay. Um, this is maybe a dumb question, but why would anybody be buying it at a much higher value? Are you talking about just a valuation or actual transactions? And
Actual transactions.
so
So,
why would they do that instead of just buying it on the market?
well, start thinking about it a little more like it's your own balance sheet, but you're a major institution. And now you just need to move $1 billion as quickly as possible from an accounting standpoint to another part of the system. So these are
Okay,
basically accounting entries, but you actually got to move the value. You can make the value, since it's internal balance sheet, you can make the value whatever you want.
I
And
see.
that's what they were doing.
So let's just open that up a little bit more for the average person that's listening, because they have a hard time, I think, seeing how XRP today is at what, 49 cents, 50 cents. Today is June 19th, 2024. To a valuation of 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 plus $1,000.
Yeah.
If you could explain that, because I think a lot of people think of the valuation as essentially market cap. And determining it from that. So how could XRP eventually become a 60, 70, $100,000 plus asset?
If it were the world reserve currency, right? A status that may be planned, may be agreed. We don't know that yet, but there's a lot of things that we don't know that are happening in the world, right?
Hmm.
Um, I mean, if every asset that's going to be tokenized, every real world asset that's going to be tokenized is going to ultimately be stored and run on the XRPL and transact on the XRPL, it would have to be in the thousands of dollars, right? So market value, and we went into this ad nauseum with trolls and all kinds of people during the time. Market value and fair market value are two different things.
Hmm.
You know, the fair market value is the concept of, like, if we knew, if we both had the same information, right? We knew what the use cases was. Let's say the Fed's on the other side and they're like, yeah, we're going to use this to basically put every dollar and every asset onto this ledger, and that's how we're going to use it. But I don't know that, then we can't actually, we have an asymmetry of information. So we can't really establish what fair market value is. We may transact, that may be a data point, right,
Hmm. Hmm.
in what the market value is. But people don't understand that contracts are written between private parties all the time that use different values for a particular asset than what the market value is.
Hmm.
In oil and gas, you agree to contracts all the time about what prices are going to be, sometimes years in advance, that you're going to be supplying to or whatever, that are not, they may be loosely tied to, loosely based or informed by what the current market price is, but no one knows what the market price is going to be in 5 years for a given asset, right?
Mm.
Tons of different things that go into play. So contracts are entered into literally every day with prices that are not market value.
Got
And
it.
that is an obvious thing that any sophisticated business person knows. If you dispute that, you don't know what you're talking about, you're uninformed, and
Hmm.
you should probably get some business experience,
Yeah.
because
Well, the
what's
average,
happening. Look at what's happening in this GameStop stuff right now, right?
right.
Um, you got a guy who's been buying all these call options, right, at a certain price, which weren't the freaking market value, yet suddenly the market value starts to reflect what these contracts that he has these options on, right?
Mm, good
And
point.
I mean, this and what you think, every short is coming out and disclosing that they have private contracts that basically say that they can acquire down at these low prices,
Mm,
right? So why isn't the market value reflecting that?
mm.
And they created, what did, like, it's like over 100% is synthetic shares that they've created. Synthetic meaning they don't exist, which are impacting the market price because that sell pressure is in, it's in the market. I mean, why is that even hard? I don't even understand how that's even hard to, like, think about. It's like, that's obvious. That's the way our markets work.
I think the average person just has no association to that. They have no
Yeah, that's probably
understanding of
right.
that. You just illuminated something that I think helps bridge that gap for those layman's people, like someone like myself. Yeah, just help me make a connection to why these things can be so dramatically different, why these prices can be so dramatically different. That was super
Yeah.
helpful. Let's shift a little bit into the future here, and still sort of take XRP as the transition to that part of the conversation, because what you referenced, the XRPL, which is the ledger for the XRP ecosystem. Let's talk about tokenization right now. Something your firm is very on top of, which is exciting to me, the tokenization of real estate, of securities, of all these different industries potentially have, it seems like all signs are pointing to that all of these tokenizations are going to happen on the XRPL. That's again what all signs are pointing to, right?
Well, it may not be all, but it's
A
going
lot.
to have material. It's going to have a material portion of all the real world assets that get tokenized.
Can you walk us through a beginner level of how monumental this actually is?
Um, well, there's this Archex company in the UK that is they've just announced at Apex they're partnered with Ripple, and their CEO was quoted at an event, it's like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, that there could be 30 to 50 trillion dollars moving across the XRPL next year. Not like 10 years from now, like next year. So there's part of this market, and I think a lot of the thinking about this is overseas, unfortunately. But the financial elite out there are fully aware of where this market's going. That's why you have Larry Fink came out in January, said we're going to be tokenizing every financial instrument, every stock, every bond. So that's where it's going to go. That's not even being disputed anymore, right?
Hmm.
So then you got to wrap your arms around all the what is every asset and all that stuff. Um, One thing we can say, it's a massive, massive market. It's a massive amount of capital and liquidity that has to basically go through some process to be taken from a piece of paper and put into a token that lives on a blockchain. And there's not that many businesses that are set up to be able to do that. Number one, I'm talking about tokenization businesses. Uh, of those that are the ones who've ever done a business deal before is like some rounding error fraction of that.
Hmm.
So we're really find ourselves in a really great place to be. We're like sophisticated from the old world of business, and we see very clearly where this is going, and we can see this wave is just coming through, right? So we are trying to build out, our reputation and our people that are kind of working with the firm, our partners, and all that type of stuff to be ready to basically do all the work that's going to have to be done. I mean, it's kind of staggering when you think about. I mean, so when Graham, I can't remember Graham's last name at Archex, but when he says 30 to 50 trillion, that means that stuff has to be tokenized, right? To be able to be moving in digital, it's got to be in digital form. That's what the tokenization of the asset is. It's putting it in digital form.
Hmm.
They're tokenizing money market funds. They're tokenizing deposits. They're tokenizing literally every little thing that exists in the marketplace. We're tokenizing gold. We're tokenizing other precious metal. We're going to be tokenizing oil. We're going to be tokenizing natural gas. Every little thing like that, and certainly securities is going to be like the first thing to do. That's easy to do, really, because it's all just if then statements and contracts that you just need to basically program into a token. And so the there's not going to be enough people almost to do this kind of work that needs to be done. And oh, by
Mhm.
the way, it looks like it's going to happen in this moment when the dollar is becoming worthless and hyperinflates because the rest of the world's kind of sick of dealing with the dollar and the sanctions and all this stuff. So it's all kind of coming to a head. And I think when you view the world through this particular lens, this is kind of what happened to us back in 2020. Everything we're going through kind of makes sense. You
Mhm.
know, you start to understand why it's gotten really crazy out there because we're living in this, debt fueled, you know, unhinged financial system.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Crazy. It's
right.
so, like you said, daunting, also incredibly exciting, certainly for you, and you seem to be perfectly positioned with your life experience, with your career, and but also still some youth to have future and look ahead into the blockchain world. Um,
A little bit,
how how concerned are you about the potentiality of these technologies, the tokenization of everything being uh, a threat against freedom, against individualism, against if all that data exists, isn't it possible that it can be manipulated, corrupted, or um, like we're seeing
Yeah,
with all our social media stuff and
yeah, yeah. Uh, technology in and of itself is not good or bad. It's depends on how the people. It's kind of like the gun control debate, right? Like guns don't kill people. People who are behind the guns who may have mental illness or whatever are the ones who are doing stuff. And it's the same thing when we start to talk about technology. Uh, and this is like the big debate around AI because now AI is learning from itself, which is the beginning of this thing we call the singularity that we'll go into. Um, I used to be much more concerned than I am now. I used to think that I was concerned about certain dark forces being able to program our money. Uh, and fortunately, I just kind of stayed in the market, kept talking to people and stuff, and so I've been presented with some really interesting ideas around that type of stuff that has allayed some of my concerns about it. For example, CBDCs and the programmability of those. Um, it may be, when we make this digital shift, because it's aligning with AI, it may displace a ton of kind of what people do right now for work, right? And we may have just a ton of workforce displaced, which then would bring about a need to provide some type of income to them, universal basic income, a royalty, whatever it's going to be. Um, for the things that are like survival based, food, medicine, shelter type things, if I'm giving someone, whoever would be issuing this stuff, this could be a mutual benefit society, it could be a government, whatever, but it's not necessarily a bad thing to make sure that they can only use it on these essential things, right? That they can't use it to buy drugs, that they can't use it to, you know, uh, for prostitution, for human trafficking, for any other thing that you don't want to promote as positive in society. Uh, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? And it would be other technologies that have less kind of controls programmed into them. Maybe this is how XRP ends up kind of sitting in the strata of these different currencies. You've got like your base level that everybody's getting, which kind of is universal basic income. And then you've got these things that can kind of be used with a little more flexibility. But it seems like that the type of people who are getting into those are actually using it in a productive manner anyway.
mm,
Um, so I guess I say all that to be that, if we got the wrong people making the decisions about how these things get programmed, then it could be very evil, and like we should be very, very concerned. Um, if it's going to be, done in a way that protects, people's rights, that provides people a safety net from a very dramatic displacement resulting from other technology that's coming of age at the same time, maybe that's going to be a good thing. Maybe it's going
Mm.
to save humanity.
On that note, in one interview that I saw of you, you mentioned the tokenization of securities, NFTs, and then you said with various classes of rights. Um, have those been developed yet? Are you a part of any of that? What do you have examples of some of those?
Yeah, I think what I would have just been talking about was actually, what I think you're talking about is when I was on with Ray Fuentes about a week ago as part of the Quantum Summit. I talked about our token offering and that we were going to have a certain preferred type token, and then we're going to have common tokens that were going to be two different classes. Generally speaking, the technology is there to do all this. This is and it's really it's how much do you want it to be what most of it is now, which is just a digital representation of a certificate, like a stock certificate, which, a paper stock certificate obviously can't do anything. It can't move money, but it's like a bearer instrument. If you've got it and you show up with it, you're the owner of that many shares in the
Mm-hmm.
entity. That's the way we're looking to do because we want to be in the market here in about a month. That's the way we're looking to do our token offering. It's basically going to be a tokenized representation of what the equity is that's embodied in a contract, of which all the people who are, participants in will have copies of the contract.
That's
The
exciting.
the more evolved portion of that is we actually embed a smart contract into the token to where, now value as it's moving on the digital realm can be spread and split accordance with the different rights and preferences that's in the smart contract itself. That's where we're going with tokenizing securities. So what I would have been referring to is basically just those relative rights and preferences and privileges that are already in stocks today, or
I
even
see.
mortgage-backed securities. Like we're talking to a couple of groups about doing some pretty material tokenization of mortgage-backed securities. And the way they do this, they kind of take a pool of assets, say it's $100 million, and they securitize that now. And when they do it, they create a bond, and then they have the rating agencies come in and they rate different tranches of the bond, and basically on, how how risky is it that tranche is going to get paid. So if you got like $100 million bond, $5 million is going to get paid on. It's like just the way the math works. It's like mathematically impossible that 5 million isn't going to come in. So
Mm-hmm.
that 5 million gets an A rating, right? And
Mm.
there's an interest rate component that ties to that A rating, right? That's going to be something modestly above what the money market value is today, which I don't even know, 5% or whatever it is today.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got your level up from that. Like the next 15 million, there's, a little more risky that'll all come in, but still pretty good. That gets like a triple B rating, still investment grade. And, there's a different interest rate that ties into that. And it stratas all the way, up or down, the way you want to think about it. It's like when you mentioned the Big Short
I
earlier.
was
Remember
just thinking that. Yep.
for the Jenga
Yes.
thing?
Yeah.
And they had the different ratings on the Jenga thing. He was like pushing them out and stuff. That's exactly how they're done. Well, those will be programmed in into when we really start tokenized. Like when we do these mortgage-backed securities, they're not just going to be tokenized representations of a certificate. It's going to have all that stuff programmed into the smart contract, which is embodied into the token itself.
So fascinating. You explained that just as well as Margot Robbie in a bathtub with a glass of champagne. So thank you for eliminating. Um, I'm
Here's
curious to
good looking, but I understand.
no, I actually understood it, which is not easy to
It's a
do.
great scene.
Um, I'm curious to get your take on what you think this entire transaction will look like, and more specifically, what are some of the key milestones do you think we'll see between now the current, what I'm going to call analog fiat system, and we're starting to, we have certain countries that are already piloting XRP, financial institutions that are adopting it, and the plumbing and infrastructure is being ready to be rolled out. What are the milestones between now and that future blockchain technology that we should look out for, that we could potentially, it's hard to say, obviously, because this is such an unprecedented transfer, but
Yep. The regulatory environment obviously has to be, um,
matured.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of movement. There's more activity. You have President Trump now saying that, if he's elected, he's going to, he's going to be the crypto president, right? And he's going to make sure that we are, as we have been, leaders in that sector of the economy, and that it's going to be promoted. That's put a lot of pressure on the Democrats. So they've kind of had to 180. They've approved now the ETH ETFs. The Securities and Exchange Commission just announced yesterday they're dropping for now their investigation into consensus and their use of ETH and things like that. Uh, so those are signs, right? Those are signs that we're moving the ball, incrementally in the right direction. The Ripple case being settled would be another huge step forward. And there are some bills, right, that are in Congress, that are looking to facilitate the development. There's a stable coin bill. Ripple's announced that they're going to have their own stable coin by the end of the year, I think.
It's
The
exciting.
the RLUSD, the real USD.
Yeah, I thought that was a clever name.
Yeah. Tether is now there's like in Times Square, they're starting to have marketing about Tether's got it's corrupt and some stuff like that. The government is starting to turn the eye of Sauron onto Tether now. You do need to, like, FTX and a lot of Luna, a lot of these projects that failed, not because the government went after them, because they were fraudulent projects, right?
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
failed on the weight of their own corruption,
Mm.
is very healthy for the market. Like we went through the same thing in the .com era, right? That you had, we lived through a period of a couple of years that if you had .com in your corporate name, you could go public
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
raise like hundreds of millions of dollars. Like that
It was
happened.
wild.
Um, so that has to occur. It seems like it is occurring. Other geographic regions, Europe, the Middle East, they're already way ahead of us, and they're going. Um, I think all this is tied in with what's going on geopolitically as well.
Hmm.
That we've had BRICS is now it's now known mainstream, even though it's been around for a long time. In fact, I think the term BRICS was coined by a Goldman Sachs exec like in 2007 or something like that. They're now very much asserting themselves. Saudi Arabia is now going to start trading in currencies other than the U.S. dollar. That's a major blow to the U.S. fiat dollar, and it's always seemed to me that we were going to have to let that system get pretty close to being wiped out. I don't think it gets like all the way to wiped out, but I think it gets really, really freaky for some period of months or something until we basically go back into a sound money standard as well, and we kind
Hmm.
of lock into place. And I've said this, respect. I think we talked to Molly. I think coined the phrase "America last." Like it's like been the whole. We were out saying "America first, America first, America first." Well, and if you were going to plan it, um, how would you have gotten Americans to really go along with this resetting of the financial system thing? I mean, we had the reserve currency, the world
Hmm.
reserve currency.
Hmm.
Wouldn't you have to kind of put us through some period of years where our quality of life like really started to diminish pretty substantially, and you know kind of have it be our idea almost? And I don't know, feels like we're kind of getting there. We're definitely much further along than we were in 2021, 2022.
Yep.
Uh, uh, you know, so
Yeah.
I hope I hope we're very close in kind of the last innings of resolving the geopolitical. Congress is now, or the House has like passed this mandatory conscription of males, between 18 and 26 now or something like that. And I don't see people like getting on board with that. It's
Yeah.
like even Cardi B, who I'm not a fan of, but some wisdom, she came out with a TikTok videos like, you think these TikTokers are going to quit doing, their stuff and go pick up a gun and go fight Russia? Is like, I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
And I think she's right.
Yeah. Um, well, I do want to ask you before we go. I promised Molly I'd ask you this question, and I see a little statue over your shoulder there. I need to know about the Space Ninja. What's up
Oh,
with what's up with the Space Ninja? It's on your website. You reference it quite a few times. Yeah, what's the significance of the Space Ninja?
well, the Space Ninja, in the first instance is our corporate logo, right? But there's a whole backstory to the Space Ninja that as a firm, we developed a thesis that we were effectively being sucked into the black hole of debt, which kind of we are as a macro
Hmm.
economy, and that what was going to happen once we were sucked into the black hole. So there had to be someone who decided to kind of go first. It became their mission to go in and see what was on the other side, and basically report back to the rest of the world. Everything's okay. Come on, this is going to be awesome.
Hmm.
And so basically the Space Ninja in our corporate logo is kind of surfing out of this thing. He's basically emerging from the other side. I like to say victoriously,
Okay.
uh, in an asset-backed world. He got sucked all the way through to where we flip everything into a sound money asset-backed world. So that's the story of the Space Ninja. And I appreciate you asking about it.
I love that. There are people going around right now saying it's the end of the world, but they always forget the little part, as we know it, which is
As we know.
also to say, how do we not? That's also the beginning of the new world that we don't know. And who's
That's
to
right.
say that that new world is not going to be infinitely better than what we already have right now?
Exactly. It
So,
may be that what we've been living in for the past in our lifetimes, Peter, have been like the worst part of it, right? And that it can be so much better because look, in an asset-backed world, like if we return to a gold money standard, sound money standard, that means the Fed is gone. That means
mhm.
no taxes to pay the Fed. That in and of itself is like just a mind-blowing thing for guys like you and me who've
Yeah.
lived in this system our entire lives. And it's the way our parents lived, right?
Yeah.
And grandparents. That's like just a remarkably freeing thing. I think this blockchain transition is super critical as well, because I think we have a duty, guys like our age, to we're taking this baton from the baby boomers and we're going to hand it down to the millennials and Gen Z, and we're doing that in a blockchain manner. I think it is critical that we pass off the right moral and ethical values as we lock that into what's on chain.
Hmm.
So all this corruption and the crazy voting scandals and all this craziness we're seeing kind of at the end is necessary to kind of bubble it up. Everybody look around, go, you know what? We don't want that to be
Hmm.
what's the next thing.
Hmm.
And it's our obligation to make sure that what ends up rising up out of the ashes is really, really good for humanity, I think.
I love that. You've made a name for yourself in this space because of your integrity. And you and I were sharing a plate of hot wings a little bit ago, and you were sharing about this spiritual partnership agreement, which we don't necessarily need to get into unless you want to share it. But I just appreciate that there is those like yourself who are bringing the moral. You know principles into the discussion, because it seems like that's been missing in the world for quite some time. So I am very optimistic about what this blockchain future looks like, and it's folks like yourself that are building it, creating it, and spearheading it, and courageously stepping into the conversation and saying, "Hey, what's fair? What isn't fair? This is what's actually going on." That's super super helpful, and we deeply appreciate that.
Thank you,
So.
Pete. As a
Um, do you
compliment.
want to share briefly about the tokenization that you mentioned a little bit earlier and what you guys are doing, the offering that you have?
Be great.
I'd love to
So
hear about it.
yeah, we formed basically a Valhil affiliate called Valhil Labs. Um, and it's going to be incubating certain use cases all in the blockchain tokenization space. Initially, real estate is going to be a huge part of it, and we've got a relationship with a company out of Florida that's kind of this network hub of networks that facilitates asset level real estate transactions called Property Source that we're going to be looking to do some work with that investment. We have a data storage business, Honeycomb Q. We have an energy use case. We have a media use case and a hospitality use case. So
Wow.
that's generally how the proceeds are going to be used to start, raising those businesses, all blockchain, all tokenization. The asset that we're going to be issuing is what we're calling a 20% PIK convertible preferred token. So it's going to be think about it as a preferred stock that will accrete at a rate of 20% a year. So we're trying to
Hmm.
raise 10 million. After a year, that 10 million would be worth 12. After another year, it's like 14.4. It's just compounding in value over time.
Hmm.
It would become convertible and redeemable upon what we're going to call a qualifying liquidity event, which is effectively the sale of one of those businesses or the taking of them public or some major liquidity event that basically would generate enough proceeds to pay back those investors with the accreted value, or give them the option of say, you know what, maybe I take some of my money back and then I roll, some into this thing you're doing. I want to be part of the public, or I want to be in Valhil Labs going forward, or whatever. So we are deep into finishing up the legal documentation. It looks like we're going to mint the tokens on Sologenic, and that we're going to publish them to the XRPL, because where else would Valhil,
Right.
publish their tokens to? Um, and so like that whole piece is kind of done. We're working through a few things like escrow. We're leaning towards Uphold to kind of help us set up with escrow. We're thinking we're going to use Uphold Vault to custody the proceeds that we generate from the raise. And the legal documents are in kind of the final stages. I think they'll be done uh, into this month, first of July. So we're hoping to launch kind of mid-July. The other piece of it is that since we're tokenizing kind of the preferred level, there's two classes of common stock as well. That there's a class A, which is the voting, and a class B, which is economically equivalent to the class A, but has no voting. So we're going to go ahead and tokenize those as well.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
If I could ask you real quick before I let you go, if a company wanted to tokenize, if they wanted to come to you and work with you to do that, is
Mhm.
it is it essentially paperwork plus technical development
Mhm.
to tokenize? Are those
Yeah.
the two sort of
Yeah. And the
paths forward on that?
technical is like just like picking the right partners that already do this and know how to do this. it's really more, we have now roadmap because we've done this for a few clients now. And we even, Valhil Capital underwrote the first NFT that was offered as a security back in 2021. So we kind of have this whole roadmap developed. We've got kind of who we like to call the band, the people that are our partners in doing this stuff. And probably after we finish the Valhil one, this is going to start to get very easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because kind of all, we got all the right musicians sitting in the right seats. So yeah, I mean, that's we've kind of not been doing as much I'd say advisory work, which to do it for a client is kind of advisory here in the past couple months, because we've been really focused on kind of our own thing, and we want to control our own destiny, so to speak, instead of always doing it for a fee for somebody else.
Right.
Um, so
So exciting, man. Congratulations on all the hard work and all the again, just positioned beautifully for all the opportunity that's coming your way. You deserve it. For those that are interested in learning a little bit more about you, they can find you on LinkedIn, of course, Jimmy Vallee, Vallee. And then you have a few different other websites. Is there one in particular that you'd like to send folks
yeah,
to?
probably the best place to go now would be Valhil Advisors. So it's valhiladvisors.io. You can go to the Honeycomb Q website, honeycombq.io, and Valhil Capital has a website as well. All those kind of tie in together. We'll probably be doing something new for the well, we will be doing something new for the Valhil Labs token raise. It'll be kind of have its own investor portal where you can kind of go right down a very easy 1, 2, 3. It's going to be a for you securities lawyers watching at home. It's going to be a private placement under Rule 506C of Reg D, which allows us to be able to talk about it with people like you, Peter. That's would be considered a general solicitation in securities speak. But we have to make sure that all the participants are accredited. So it'll be accredited investors only type thing.
Uh, Sorry, last question. Any other projects that you like in the crypto space besides XRP? For those that are interested in what you're looking at personally.
So we're beyond kind of the investing in
Okay.
cryptocurrency stuff. However, we do still have a lot of, I mean, people, we've got a lot of Flare, a lot of XLM, a lot of XDC. Trying to think
You
what else.
mentioned
And then we've got
Sologenic.
Sologenic. We do have some Solo tokens, but we kind of work more with the Sologenic team. Mike McCluskey's their like head of strategic partnerships there. Fabio, great guy there. I mean, they've got some really great and they're just really good people to work with. So we like
Mhm.
them a lot. Yeah, and then they've got Corium as well, right? So Corium isn't as directly XRP. Sologenic's actually built on the XRPL. Its
Mhm.
DEX is on the XRPL. So that's one of the reasons we're kind of going in that particular niche for our deal. Corium, though, is its own smart contract blockchain thing and very good technology. There's some, but because a lot of stuff we're doing is more securities related. We're, really starting to work with your kind of digital securities broker dealer types. There's like Texture Capital out there out of New York that we hope to do a lot of work with. I mentioned our checks out of the UK. Everybody should go check out that platform. They're like miles ahead of where we are in the US, and they're minting a lot of their stuff to the XRPL. They're also custodying a lot of their stuff because it's all institutional grade right now.
Mhm.
They're custodying it with Medico, which now I think they call Ripple Custody. So, there's but we are focused more on kind of the securities tokenization stuff than the cryptocurrency. That's a little just kind of boring to us now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You've given us so much time. I thank you so much. I'm a podcaster and I'm also a dad. So I have one more question if I can ask you before we go.
Oh,
My daughter is about to head into college. My son's a year and a half away. What advice do you have the youth? Because this is their future, and current universities, in my humble opinion, are not bringing students into this very real reality that's right around the corner. What
mhm.
should they be looking into? What should they be learning? Any advice on that?
My when I tell my own children, first, like do something that you really enjoy the subject matter of. Like if you don't like blockchain stuff or computers and that's it'll just be horrible experience for you
Yeah.
to do it. And there's probably some other thing you can be involved in that you can touch a little blockchain and probably do very, very well. So I'd say do the thing that really you would like to be a subject matter expert in, because that's what's going to be on your desk every day and what you're going to have to concentrate on. That's just
Hmm.
good for your soul. Um, I'm a big business, proponent. Like pretty much any type of business degree you get, you'll be able to work in doing something. So your finance and your accounting type things are really, really solid. And if you want to go on to be a lawyer, if you want to go on to be an accountant or whatever, and all those will have roles to play in a blockchain financial future for sure. I mean, what is the XRP? It's an accounting ledger, right? I mean, it's
Hmm.
just general ledger.
Hmm.
Um, I think with all the craziness that's been going on these past handful of years, you know, psychology and all that kind of stuff of helping people. My youngest daughter is a rising junior at Alabama. That's her major, and I mean, there's tons of cutting edge developments in that. That's really cool. I enjoy even hearing about it, and I'm not in that sector. That's probably a pretty good one too.
Fascinating. You revealed your Texan background by saying finance. I've heard Texans call it finance as opposed to finance. But
That's
anyway,
funny.
Jimmy, thank you so much for your time. I know you're
Yeah,
crazy busy.
Peter.
This is an amazing conversation, and we'll go on the record books for sure.
Yeah,
Thanks
I
again,
really
Jimmy.
enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.
All right.